Ensure you have selected the right speaker for audio output. Test your speaker to ensure it is working fine from the audio settings option on the lower left corner of your screen. If necessary, dial in using phone.
Hello everyone, I hope you are doing well. My name is Vikal and I'm moderator for today's exciting event. I'll firstly like to thank you for taking time out to attend the interactive learning power hour hosted by Harbinger. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'd like to inform you that Power Hour is a series of interactive roundtable discussions hosted by Harbinger, where industry stalwarts share their experience and insights on a particular topic. The topic for today's discussion is the digital accessibility from the viewpoints of decision maker. With that, I'd like to introduce host for today's roundtable, Dr. Vikas Joshi. Dr. Vikas Joshi is a business leader who is passionate about product development and technology entrepreneurship. His mission is to help create software products that make a difference. Key part of that mission is to inspire tech professionals and entrepreneurs to grow and develop. I'll hand over the stage to you, Dr. Vikas, and you can take it over from there.
Thank you, Vikal, and a big hello to all of you on this lovely morning. We have a great audience of professionals today, and we have an outstanding panel of experts. I'm going to introduce them to you in a second, but I want to take some time to set the context of this Power Hour. So here's our game plan. We're going to start by looking at the importance of digital accessibility. We'll take a quick look at the variety, breadth, and scope of digital accessibility issues. And then with the help of the panel, we go on a quest to figuring out what is in it for businesses. They will help us discover the business benefits of implementing digital accessibility. Next, we get down to the how question. What are some of the strategies for implementing digital accessibility? We're going to talk about that. And finally, the practitioners on our panel are going to tell us stories. They're going to tell us about the challenges they faced and the best practices that evolved out of their work on accessibility. So does that sound like a plan? Yes? Well, let's get right after it then. First and foremost, why is digital accessibility important? As you can see, 1 billion people, nearly 15% of the planet, has some disability or the other, according to WHO. And that's a lot of people. If you zoom in on the United States, do you expect the percentage to be higher or lower? Any guesses? Let's see. It's 20%, even higher in the US. Now, when we think of disability, we commonly think about vision or hearing, but that's not it. We're going to see some facts that might surprise you. There's all these different types of categories of disability. You have cognition, you have mobility, self-care, inability to live independently, and a combination of these. So you can see the broad scope of accessibility concerns. Let's see one more bit of statistic. And this is interesting. According to the American Optometric Association, beginning in the early to mid 40s, many adults may start to have problems seeing clearly at close distance, especially when reading and working on a computer. Now, that's not all. There's also the issue of color perception. 1 in 12 has some kind of a color perception issue. So those were just some illustrations. The list of disorders is quite long. First, you have the visual disorders, and there's a whole list of those you can see here. And then come the hearing impairments. Apart from vision and hearing, you also have physical impairment. So this could be loss or damage of limbs, arthritis, paralysis, Parkinson's, and so on. And then there's other types of learning difficulties or cognitive difficulties. People have dyslexia, for example, or various mental problems like anxiety that come in the way of learning effectively. So if you use a sort of a wide angle lens, there's this vast landscape of disabilities that you need to design for, and the scale and scope of disability is quite breathtaking. If such a large group of people has issues in accessing digital content, then it becomes the responsibility of business leaders to make online content accessible. People with disabilities should be able to enjoy online content and services with the same ease as everyone else. And this is not just a noble cause, it makes business sense and it has legal implications. So there's a lot of reasons why one needs to look at this seriously. So let's ask you in a quick poll, how is your organization looking at accessibility? Vikal, could you launch the poll for us, please? There you go.
Yeah, we are live.
I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on accessibility.
We have got a very good participation today, so yeah. I'll give this another 10 more seconds and then I'll end the poll. I got the results. I'm sharing the results with you all.
Thank you. Interesting. So as you can see, there's some kind of a opinion toward going well beyond what the law needs us to do or what the standards mandate, but really go out and do more. And that's so heartening to see coming from this audience. We can stop sharing the results and go back to so what question. This is a perfect time to dive into the topic. Please join me in welcoming our panel members. We have Cassandra Blessingham, who joins us from Washington, D.C. usually. Today she's in a different place. She can tell you all about it. She's president and CEO of IACET, an accreditation body that essentially certifies, colleges and education and training industry participants in terms of meeting certain accreditation requirements. She has a 21-year-long career in academia and as a professor as well as administrator before she took over her role in IACET. She earned her Master's of Education in Adult and Higher Education from University of Missouri, St. Louis, where she's also currently pursuing her doctoral studies. So welcome, Cassandra. Great to have you with us.
Thank you, Vikas. Great to be here.
And do tell us what made you interested in this topic.
Well, the invitation for one, I enjoy working with Harbinger Group, but this is a huge topic for us internally. I took over the role of IACET in my current role in 2020, January of 2020, right before the pandemic hit. So we've been faced with many challenges and including making sure that our accredited providers are equipped to and ready to handle their learners as they serve. But the topic of digital accessibility has become prevalent within the organization, particularly around our website and how we deliver the training for our accredited providers and other individual professional affiliates. So we are in the process of making sure that we're putting a strategy in place to quickly turn some things around so that we're able to be a part of, the small percentage of people who are, doing it right. And so the accessibility issue is important for our branding, for, our bottom line, but overall to make sure that the people who are serving adult learners worldwide have the leadership, the thought leadership to turn to for this type of learning.
So give me a sense of how many accreditation providers, are we talking about dozens or hundreds, or in terms of the impact of your work in accessibility?
Well, the impact of our work does reach hundreds at this point in time. We're a little over 600 accredited providers with a few hundred knocking on our door as we speak to become accredited. I think that, we can't talk about accessibility without even introducing the equity issue that exists where people do not have access. So, starting there and working in particularly with workforce. Workforce, it goes from the inner city, into rural areas. So accessibility just on the ability to access digital content, is an issue. But once, we actually get there, the accessibility piece is a part of that too, because like you mentioned in the one of the first slides around the types of disabilities that exist within the states, it varies. And in some areas, it's a lot more prevalent than it is in others. So in working with our accredited providers or training organizations that are interested in becoming accredited, we find that the topic is at hand. And I'm hoping that, having this conversation and being a part of this panel reaches some of those, as we've tried to invite in as many people as possible. But it is definitely a hot topic, and one that we work in hand in hand with our industry.
Wonderful. It's great to have you, and I'm sure more insights will unfold as we go. We also have David Berman, who is an accessibility expert based in Ottawa. David's been called the David Suzuki of design. His book, Do Good Design, and I think he calls himself Do Good Author, was published by Pearson in 2013. He has over 3 decades of experience in inclusive design, and he strongly believes that we can include everyone without trade-offs. He's widely sought advisor and serves on various committees and bodies. Excited to have you here, David. And thanks for joining.
Well, thanks, and hello to all. Yep, My name is David Berman, and I'm delighted to be part of this continuum. I understand how Harbinger has been nailing this for over a decade in terms of e-learning content, making things accessible. So we're excited to do whatever we can to help echo that success out to as broad an audience as possible. So thank you so much for inviting me to be part of the Power Hour.
Wonderful. And what made you passionate about inclusive design? What was the starting point?
What made me passionate about inclusive design? Well, my parents taught me that social justice is not optional. And Vic, as you mentioned my book, Do Good Design. Over the last 10 to 15 years, I realized that because of the time we live in, the biggest opportunity perhaps I have as an inclusive designer, as a professional communicator, is to focus on including everyone. As Cassandra was pointing out, this is the underpinning of what we're doing. We've, there have been perhaps 7,000 generations of humans. And we just happen to live in the very first generation where it's truly possible to include everyone. We have the technologies that have been developed in the last 3 decades have liberated more people than all the wars and revolutions in the history of humanity. And so, because my parents taught me that social justice is not optional, I figure because we can do this now, we must.
Well said. Well said. Thank you. Thank you for joining us again. And we also have Krista Weber, Director of User Experience at Vector Solutions, a provider of online training courses for a variety of disciplines, including architecture, engineering, and construction. A fast-growing digital catalog of e-learning courses, and also a Harbinger customer. Krista joins us from Memphis, Tennessee, and has over 20 years of experience in design. Krista, too, is a strong advocate of inclusive design. She oversees a portfolio of 19 different products and spearheads its transition over an inclusive design system that she herself implemented. So welcome, Krista, and we're going to hear more from you, but tell us what makes you interested in this topic.
Hello, and thank you for having me. I became interested in accessibility because as a UX designer, I wanted to create products that could be used by as many people as possible. And also an added bonus is that accessibility improves the user experience for everyone. I just view accessibility and user experience as being intertwined. It's pretty hard to separate them if you're doing them well. Initially, my focus was solely on the digital products at Vector. But that role has expanded as Vector was looking for somebody to lead accessibility for the entire organization. And so that has led into expanding into the courseware and everything else as well in the company.
Great. So let's dive into our first part, which is going to be the business benefits. The other two we will talk about would be industry best practices and strategies to implement. We'll use these three lenses. At Harbinger, we handle literally dozens of requests for proposals every week, okay? And one question that learning leaders often ask us is, we all understand accessibility is important. Sometimes it's a line item on an e-learning project proposal. Sometimes the whole project is accessibility. But how do we justify the costs of accessibility to business? How can we talk their language? And here's what we tell them. There's at least 4 talking points when a CLO is in conversation with business leaders. Number one is the obvious benefit is there's a ton of people out there who have disabilities. That's like 1/5 of the global population, right? So there's an opportunity to increase your market share by reaching out to a greater number of people. And that opportunity should not be lost on you. Secondly, there's this innovation. It's very interesting that when you design for accessibility, you end up designing better. And I'm sure the panel will talk more about it, but if you can design with accessibility in mind and inclusivity in mind, it becomes easier for people who do not have disabilities as well. It becomes easier for web crawlers, for example, and it's easier for people to navigate those content pieces. The third part is enhancing your brand. Diversity and inclusion efforts is essential to business success, and D&I would be an initiative that would help attract talent and even create a more positive public image, apart from it being something you should do. But we are talking about the business benefits. And so with a clear, well-articulated commitment to accessibility, you'll not only enhance your internal culture, but you will build a brand that tells your prospects that you're innovative, inclusive, and trustworthy. And finally, there's the question of avoiding liability, right? Because the ADA, the American with Disabilities Act, provides for a legal framework that has heavy penalties for discriminating against people for disabilities. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn to Krista and really ask what benefits she found when she started some of her journey. So over to you. Help us get inside what's going on here. You know, what benefits did you see in implementing accessibility, Krista? And you want to unmute yourself so we can hear you.
Sorry about that. From a business standpoint, a lot of times it tends to be things are going to happen that are negative if you don't do accessibility. Like you'll hear a lot about business implications of lawsuits and loss of reputation, and that's certainly really important. But I think we can also frame that as a positive thing that, for instance, at Vector, we serve a lot of first responders. We're in the education arena. And there's a lot of pride in the fact that we work for a company that's supporting people on the front lines that are serving our community. So our motto is safer, smarter, better. Incorporating accessibility practices shows our commitment to supporting the people that are supporting our community. And that's, a positive way that it impacts our reputation and shows that we're making a commitment to including all people in our products. We also increase our reach and audience by allowing the most people to be able to access our products. Most people in accessibility have seen the numbers. You had mentioned them today, about 15% of the world population. The CDC's updated numbers are more like 1 in 4 in the US right now have a disability, and it's higher actually in some states. Tennessee, where I live, the number is actually 1 in 3 people have a disability. It makes sense that we should want to include those people. Like if from a strictly business standpoint, if you said, I have this thing that we can do, that would increase your reach to an additional 25% of the population. How can you as a business, that's a wonderful opportunity as a business, right? And so focusing on the things that it does, not just the negatives, I think are really important. The director of UX obviously have a big focus on the user experience, and I can't really separate good user experience from accessibility because they're intertwined, and accessibility improves the experience for everyone. Things like having ample contrast and easy to read text and large click areas make things easier for all people to use. And finally, I think the most obvious argument is that it's the right thing to do. I put this last because when you're in a business, obviously you need to make a profit. And if you ask upper management if they think we should improve our accessibility, the answer is, of course, yes, we should. But it's disingenuous to not acknowledge that there's a cost to doing that as well. And so things like taking engineers off of coding so they can learn how to write accessible code costs the company thousands of dollars in productivity. Paying for services like BPATs, converting our courses, et cetera, all has a cost. It's unfair to say that just because we're financial concerns that decision makers have that they don't support accessibility. That's why it's important to show the really positive things that doing accessibility can provide for the company. And, it's not just that it's the right thing to do, because I do believe that inherently most people want to do the right thing, but like these are the business benefits as well to supporting accessibility.
Wow, thank you, Krista. I think that's comprehensive and very persuasive. So I'm thinking in my head, Krista makes this persuasive presentation to the CEO, and he or she agrees, let's do it. And then the time comes when the rubber hits the road, as they say. What's going through their mind when it comes to actually taking the decision to, go ahead and budget for accessibility implementation? What are some of the considerations that begin to pop up in the decision maker's mind? I'm going to request Cassandra to get inside the decision maker's head and tell us a little bit about what's going on there.
Sure. And, it's interesting because I'm in this place, right now as we speak. And, of course, we're always thinking bottom line, right? We're always thinking, the branding piece. And that just is the nature of, the CEO's responsibility to the organization and to the board. But, a lot of times this thing is not even intentional. Right. And so, to honestly, be a part of the ADA's 2021 report that, shows 98.1% of, homepages have this detectable, level 2 standard failures. So we're, like I said, we're in the process of having my CIO, Randy Bowman, give me a strategy for our, new website design and what that's going to look like, because, and not just that, just the department in general. And so, I start there with, if you build it, that old field of dreams, if you build it, they will come. But really, the truth of the matter is, if you build it and you build it well, they'll come and they'll stay. And you won't have to worry about branding. You won't have to worry about your bottom line, because you've built this, inclusive environment that allows people to access the digital, content that you're putting out there. And, you want it to be comfortable, and you want it to be, of ease. And so the challenges that people have around, the content that they're trying to access, is met with a little bit more of a more ease. And so I want a well-built, operation versus, just building it. I think just building it is a Band-Aid approach. And so when someone like Krista, comes to me with this, I'm like, let's do it. Because not only do I have to concern myself with the branding and the bottom line, but my main concern is, I'm doing this work because it's what I love to do. This is my passion. Learners are our business. And if we are not concerning ourselves with their needs and the organizations that serve them, then, we're it's a moot point. And so it needs to be a win-win. It needs to be something that is, achievable. And this is a no-brainer. Like I said, I don't think that, a lot of the websites that are built are intentionally built to exclude anyone. It's just outdated design, right? And so let's catch up. And that's my position.
Right. So this is great. I mean, to sort of see Krista's perspective and yours, I think we're between that, I think we can integrate and understand the business side of the question. So we now move to the second part of the Power Hour, which is implementation strategies. And it's time to head over to David and ask him, what are some of the thoughts you have in this regard? David, over to you.
Absolutely, because I'm pleased to. First of all, I want to shout out that Krista's spot on with the benefits she described, and I even go as further, Krista, to say I'm not even sure we have to be concerned about the net cost, because not every CEO out there is as aware and clever as Cassandra is regarding the attitude. But you look, because I've worked with businesses and NGOs and governments on 5 continents on their e-accessibility strategy, and whether we're doing their websites or their e-learning modules or their documents or their apps, it makes sense that every communication professional team we meet up with is understandably a bit terrified. They're terrified when we're done. I'm sure, Krista, you probably went through this just like I did as a designer. You're terrified that your products are going to get compromised, that you're going to lose the nuance and the drama. It won't be funny anymore. It won't be engaging, and every executive is worried that the cost is going to go up. And we find that if people just use techniques where they're at the 11th hour as a final step saying, oh yeah, let's now do the extra work to make it accessible, no question, it costs more, it compromises the product, it's painful, and it distracts us from better things. But if we get the habit of being inclusive by default, if we actually change our culture, if we go deep enough so that at every step in the process we're building in accessibility, we're building inclusivity into the products, then there are no trade-offs. And indeed, what we find, whether we're doing an accessibility strategy for a very small organization or for an entire country, that we net out to lower the cost, but only if we go that deep. So I can share you stories of clients who have saved literally millions of dollars by starting off with that approach that Cassandra was mentioning. So I want people to believe that it is possible, if you go deep, to actually have no trade-offs. Certainly there are some things, Krista's right, there are some things that are going to cost more, like having to add captions or audio description to a meeting. That's unavoidable. But those are few, and in balance, the total net will be a reduction in cost if we have the discipline to create things. And then, as Krista mentioned, we are going to be creating products that are more effective for everyone. If we see accessibility as simply an extreme case of usability, then it's a natural play out of good design philosophy. Design big, usability is part of design, accessibility is part of usability. If in that Venn diagram, accessibility is in the middle of usability, then there will be no conflict. There'll be no trade-off. And we'll get better products. And as you mentioned so wisely, Vikas, we will expand our market share. We'll reach all 100% of the potential audience rather than losing out on perhaps 20% or 16% or whichever market we're in. And of course, also drive down the regulatory risk.
Thank you, David. And I'm going to sort of probe a little further into that in terms of best practices. One of the things you mentioned was to bake it in rather than lap it as afterthought in the end, right?
Right.
That's one of the things. The second is sort of start with accessibility in mind. It's sort of like the three concentric circles you talked about, the accessibility, design, and then the whole product, right? Is there any other best practices that you have encountered that you would like to share with us in terms of the types of teams, the types of skills, the kinds of tools, anything else you want to share with the audience in terms of best practices?
Certainly, and just to qualify that, of course, the best practices vary greatly depending on what products we're publishing, what timeline we're on. But when an organization is thrown down that they're excited about this, and most people are, we have some standard plays we recommend. And one of them is counterintuitive. It has to do with which project you start with. Because what we find is typically an organization is taking, let's say, an existing website or an existing e-learning library, an existing LMS setup, and saying, okay, let's make it accessible. Well, let me draw you this analogy. Imagine you've got two hospitals. And one hospital has been around for 100 years. And we realize we need to make that hospital accessible. We need to put accessible elevators in and ramps and all kinds of stuff. Well, it's going to be relatively expensive to rip out the old elevators and put new ones in, because this building wasn't built for accessibility. Now, if you were designing a brand new hospital, it's so much easier if you build in the accessibility from step zero. So if this is your first rodeo, imagine how much easier it is to build accessibility into a new product, a future product that you're developing from scratch, rather than maybe your existing main website. And that way you'll get confident and you'll get the basics down pat. Another version of this we often have organizations that are saying, wow, like we've got 1,000 public facing documents and we need to make them all accessible because someone told us all these PDF files or EPUB files or whatever are not accessible. Well, it may be better to start working internally where you're not public facing, where it's more low risk. So imagine if I were to coach you on how to make your internal email communications more accessible. Meaningful subject lines, not using color in the middle of the body because 10% of your guys in your organization can't find your comments. It takes them 10 times as long to find your comments. You start doing it internally where the risk is lower because you're not worrying about your main audience seeing you do it. And so again, it's counterintuitive, but you start doing it in internal documents. And people tend to focus on the public facing ones because they're the ones that could get them sued. But in order to get your practice going, I actually tend to recommend that we build internally first, and then you're going to feel confident and masterful when you get your certification in accessibility, or you're ready to say, because, and I'll just blather this one more thing, and then I'll pause. It's designers, dev teams, coders, everyone's a little terrified, not just to figure out how to do it, but they're all wondering, did I go far enough? Am I ready to tell the world our website's accessible, our module's accessible? Because you're afraid someone down the street's going to say, wait a moment, you call that accessible? That's not accessible. I'll show you accessible. So getting that confidence level is crucial. And that's why we love international standards like WCAG 2.0, WCAG 2.1. I know this is what you guys preach to your own clients at Harbinger. It gives us a level where we can say, We'll never be perfect at accessibility, just like we'll never publish a website without a typo somewhere. But we have a line that says if we meet or exceed this line, we can confidently say we're part of the solution rather than part of the problem.
Those are great points, David. First of all, having the culture of accessibility within the company, and I think the email was a great example. It's way more than dog fooding. It's actually molding your mind to think accessibility, right? And once you start experiencing it, then you can create it for others. Also, this whole issue around confidence and knowing that you meet some standard. So great inputs. So we are now going to turn to our last topic today, which is the challenges. And I guess we're going to start with Krista. What challenges did you face while analyzing your organization's accessibility needs? And I believe you were involved right from the beginning of the project, so it would be interesting to hear your perspectives on that one.
Sure. First of all, accessibility isn't just for software or courses. As an organization, accessibility touches almost every area. And so things like training for customer experience so that they can better help people with disabilities who contact them, or education for company-wide regarding how to create accessible documents and emails. All of those things were things that had to be incorporated. And so as somebody that was also new to the company, while coming in, because initially my focus was just on creating an accessible design system, and then it quickly expanded beyond to being accessibility for the entire company. The sheer amount of conversations that I needed to have around expectations regarding the level of compliance support that was going to be provided, and determining necessary steps to reach compliance in areas that maybe I wasn't really that familiar with. This requires a lot of communication with leadership from each department regarding the changes that we need to make. And, we all know that change is hard. And so overcoming kind of the resistance by talking about the value that accessibility is going to bring to the table, while we're making these changes, that was definitely a key to getting buy-in from the various departments. Sometimes it's tough when you don't know the ins and outs of a particular skill set. But once I kind of understood the level of compliance and started writing a company-wide plan, I quickly realized that details like timing are so important when you have a plan that's organizational wide. It doesn't do any good to have QA doing manual testing with screen readers and keyboard only if the developers don't know how to write accessible code. So I wanted to prevent things from being pulled to a halt immediately, because I had, started QA on something, but everything was literally getting flagged and sent back again. And then all of a sudden we're not building any software. And so really being a detailed person and having repeated conversations around, this is the order we need to be in, planning that progress in specific order and communicating it, not just with conversations with each specific area, but also in a written plan that's shared and open to the entire company to understand, so that we're being transparent with the things, the timing. I divided it by quarters and steps and everything, so that people knew when the changes that were going to affect them were going to occur. And one of the other big things was, how are we going to measure improvement? Because it's really important that we have a means of measuring improvement over time. And that meant planning for testing our accessible content like software and courseware to understand where we are, but also to set a baseline to start with, and then regular testing so that we can both have accountability, but also measure progress. For software, this is BPATs, but for courseware, we're challenged with owning a huge course library. So we definitely needed to prioritize which courses we test and remediate first, and make sure that we're choosing ones that are used the most, so that we can make improvements to accessibility that have the largest potential reach and even gain more buy-in for these continual changes. And, those are the changes that will have an impact on the largest amount of people. Also, having all these plans are great, but they're not going to get past the planning stage if we don't provide education to the teams. We can't ask developers to write accessible code without providing them training to be able, and the tools to be able to do so. Team know-how is something that definitely had to be addressed. We had to give training to get teams up to speed. Otherwise, this whole plan was going to be doomed to fail. And part of that path to success is talking with leadership to understand the needs of each of those departments. And, for instance, we have a lot of engineers. I was leaning towards doing an accessibility boot camp so that we could get everybody up to speed in a few days. But after talking with leadership, it became clear that we weren't going to be able to do that. They needed to have e-learning courses that were on demand, because we can't take the entire engineering staff off all at the same time. And also, because of the current hiring climate, there's a lot of turnover. And so we would get the people that were there right at that moment up, but how are we going to address all the new hires? So having a one-time boot camp wasn't going to meet the training needs of new hires that are constantly joining the company. So we had to make adjustments to the plans based on feedback. But that also helped with the fact that when they realized that, we were going to be reasonable and make adjustments based on feedback, they're more willing to get in line with the plan. And increasing team know-how includes not just skill-specific education, but also teaching what accessibility is, why it matters, and addressing myths surrounding accessibility. One of those things that comes up a lot is I often hear accessibility only helps for people who are blind. And so providing overall corporate education and making them understand that accessibility isn't optional for people with disabilities. It's the only way that they can actually use our products. So it's definitely not optional for them. And so just put a ton of effort, and we want to make sure that we understand that this is not a short-term thing where we remediate once and we're done, but that the only way that this is going to be something that we can continue doing and is affordable is if we shift left and incorporate accessibility from the very beginning. We know that we will have a push for remediating what we currently have, but once we do that, we have to approach this like this is not a diet, but a lifestyle change where we are going to be incorporating accessibility from the very beginning, so that we're not constantly just going and remediating based on findings that we have in VPATs, but that we're actually incorporating it into our process the whole way.
Great. Thank you for sharing what they call the lived experience, right? You have sort of lived and breathed this, and a lot of great points you hit over there. I'm going to head over to David once again for a critical question from a design perspective. And basically, people usually think of accessibility as a blocker for implementing stuff that is interactive and engaging. And you touched upon this just a few minutes ago. So we know you do not agree. Would you like to give us some examples of how to handle interactive, engaging content, and then make it so that it's also accessible at the same time?
Oh, certainly, because I'd be pleased to do so. If we spend over half of our time auditing websites and documents and e-learning systems and all kinds of digital accessibility for our clients, and so imagine you hire us for to audit one of the products from your development team, or train them. If we're not remote, if we're in person post-pandemic, then one of the first things everyone's going to get from us is we have these jar openers, and our slogan is, when we design for the extremes, everyone benefits. Mm-hmm. And we love to show this example, because if I've got a jar, of course I can use this jar to get the lid off of it. Now, this technology was designed originally for people who were mobility challenged. But now we all have these in our drawers. And so when we're talking to the development team, we're saying, listen, if you really think that there's going to have to be a trade-off in your UX, let go of that. Because let's say we do an audit of a web property. Let's say we find 48 issues, and when we make our recommendations for each one, let's say there's 48 issues standing between WCAG 2.0 AA conformance and not conforming. Every step of the way, we're going to find a recommendation that has no trade-offs. That is, it's either going to be completely invisible to the typical user, like something we do in code that your typical user won't experience, or it's going to improve the experience for every user. It's going to increase market share. It's going to reduce people abandoning tasks or abandoning forms. Krista was mentioning like larger landing zones. It's a classic. There's no downside to larger landing zones for everyone, because I may have shaky hands all the time, but maybe right now today I'm on the bus and I'm holding my arm and I've got my mobile device in my hand, and although I'm typically mobile, I'm trying to hit the right button to buy your product and I can't do it because it's so tiny, or it's we're in a smoky room and the color contrast isn't exceptional. Everyone wants high color contrast controls. Everyone who's visual, and so when we accommodate that, you mentioned 10% of men on the planet approximately have some level of color deficit. Well, everyone benefits when we use better high contrast designs. And again, easier to build it in early than to have to fix it at the end. Are those the type of examples you're looking for, or should I bring in some more?
These are perfect examples. I was actually curious, David, in your testing team, where you sort of look at something and say, is this accessible? Do you have people with disabilities? Is that something you have tried?
Yes, absolutely. So when we're testing a product, when we're trying to discover how it could be better from an accessibility perspective, sometimes a client is simply looking for regulatory conformance. They're being very practical. They've got a deadline, or maybe they got a letter from a lawyer. And but whether we're just looking for that or not, when we do an audit, we give a list of every issue we find, and we identify the things that are WCAG failures, but we also identify functional accessibility issues. Mm-hmm. And these are things that Krista was alluding to, that there's, just because you've ticked off every box on the WCAG 2.1 AA checklist, for example, it doesn't mean that it actually works. So on our team, we also have a diverse group of people with various lived experience, depending on the product. Like if the product has multimedia content, then we're going to want someone with hearing loss to experience it. We're also going to want someone who is deaf since birth, because those are two very different experiences. For one person, ASL is their mother tongue. For the person with hearing loss, they may have grown up thinking in English or French or Punjabi, but now they're experiencing a world where their brain's wired one way, but now they have to get the content in another way. The largest bandwidth pipe into the human brain is the eye. So it's no surprise that visual communicators tend to want to use the eye a lot to make sure that content gets in and it's memorable. However, if we want to include everyone, we've got to make sure that there's multiple modes of communication as per UDL principles. We're always thinking about making sure we communicate each message in a variety of ways, using a variety of senses, so each person can enjoy receiving, responding, remembering, recalling. We want to delight everyone. We don't just want to accommodate, we want to delight.
Great points, David. Thank you again for sharing those examples. We're going to probably be, as I had expected, running out of time here. But maybe, if you don't mind, Krista, if you can give us like a quick story on how your journey went. I think you shared some of the challenges, but in terms of your sense of accomplishment through the journey, then we will be ready for conclusion summary once you're done.
Sure. I think that if I were to just describe this journey in a nutshell, like it started so small and just, hey, I want the design system to be inherently accessible. I don't want two versions of things or an accessibility toggle or anything. It started there, and the conversations grew. I realized that there was no central place for accessibility within our company. And so nobody actually knew where to go to ask questions. And so just starting to have conversations, started with the CTO, having conversations with him and talking about, I knew that I was going to have to start pushing for it to get the buy-in for this. And so, having conversations with, hey, did you hear about the Domino's lawsuit? And the fact that, because I heard a lot of feedback that we only need to do it if we're a government website. And, just kind of like finding out what the myths are and dispelling those myths and having those conversations. Sometimes I feel like I need to have 10 conversations before things start clicking, and just being, look, I know that this is the right thing to do. I'm a very determined person, and I'm going to keep having the conversations. And, the answer may be no at first, but like eventually I'm going to get the buy-in. You can tell that I'm pretty passionate about this as I'm talking about it, but I kept having the conversations, and, there are days where I feel like I'm making really amazing progress. And I think if I step back and just look at the fact that I haven't been at this company a year, the company has really taken to this, right? And they're supporting it, and it's this amazing progress. But there are also days where I feel like, hey, this didn't, I'm running up against, it's taking too long, all these things. And so the things that I do then are, I look for one small thing that I can do to increase the accessibility today. Like, take that small win, realize that those small wins will build up into big wins, and just keep pressing forward. And that it's not something, a company that's big isn't going to come into compliance overnight. And so we just have to do the things we can, keep talking, and keep the channels of communication open at the company.
Absolutely. Every difference you make matters. And this is an exercise in change management, because it goes right down to what people have learned, unlearning some of it, and then committing to go down the new path. So we are here at the conclusion slide, and it's pretty self-explanatory, but I would invite Cassandra to add anything she wants to in reference to the conclusion of today's session. We talked about the 3 lenses to study accessibility: the business benefits, best practices, and implementation strategies. And in each of those, we learned a few things. Would you like to add something, Cassandra?
Sure. So I won't date myself, but I'll just say a long time ago, I joined a sorority, and our motto, is service to all mankind. So I have found myself, in this career of education. I'm in the right job. I'm in the right place, and my career has intentionally led me to this place in this point in time. And, at the end of the day, it's really about, doing what's right and what's needed, and we can't advance. There are so many, the only constant is change, right? And so, yes, change management, is still a huge deal, and it's still a hard pill for people to swallow, because people get comfortable. But we can't be comfortable if everybody's not comfortable. And, I there were a couple of things that just resonated with me from David and Krista both. David, starting internally, and I took this on when, I took the position, like, what tools do we have here? What is it that we can do internally? Because you can't really strengthen externally if you're not taking care of home, and if your home isn't clean, right? Because that's the only way that you're going to be able to receive guests and be able to accommodate your guests. The other thing was the lifestyle change versus the diet. It is a lifestyle change. It is just making the switch and, living healthy, being right. And so those two things, kind of resonated with me. The other, thing that I just like to say, in closing out my part is, as a leader, we can't afford not to do these things. We talk about, the risks. I mean, the lawsuits increased dramatically where, accessibility is concerned. And it's not that people are just looking to, make a quick buck through a lawsuit. It really, just think about it. Sometimes people don't move until they get that letter from the lawyer. I don't want a letter from a lawyer. I want to make sure that we are doing the right things by way of the education community and, the people that, the education community is serving. So, we really just can't afford to do that. And, I'll just say, it's not invest. It's an investment. We have a part of our budget that, it's just wise to just make the investment. Your building can't be, usable if you can't have the right types of elevators in. So there's so many analogies that we can, use the elevator and the escalator analogies within our own building, within our own business structures. So I think that, you can't afford not to invest. You can't afford not to get buy-in from your leadership, whether that's your board or your CEO. It's just important that we make sure that people have the access to the information that they need. And because we're in the business of, serving, it's just imperative that we do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Cassandra. Very well said. This is one of those situations in which the right thing to do happens to be the smart thing to do. And so there should be no disagreement about this. I'm going to call Vikalp once again to close this out. But before that, take a minute, tell us a little bit about what Harbinger Group can do and how Harbinger Group could help in this journey toward developing digital accessibility. Over to you, Vikalp.
Thank you very much, Vikas. And I'd like to share with our viewers that Harbinger is a global technology service company building products and solutions that helps people work and learn effectively. Our journey started in 1990s, and that's almost 32 plus years of operations. We are more than 700 professionals, a team of more than 700 professionals, which includes a team of 150 plus e-learning producers. So we are small enough to care and large enough to deliver. That is what we like to say. Harbinger has a dual shore operations in US and India. We work with clients across multiple industries, predominantly with education, e-learning, human resource, digital publishing, and high-tech, to name a few. With respect to our offerings, we provide our clients with product development, end-to-end custom content development, learning technology services and solutions along with the modernization. And we'd like to say that, the recognition from the industry, from the likes of Brandon Hall and Training Magazine Network, are the testimony to the work that we have been putting out for our end customers. And in terms of accessibility support, Harbinger has been helping its customer for over a decade now with the accessibility needs. We have a bouquet of services around accessibility to meet all your business needs. And you feel free to write us on info@harbinger.com, which I'll be setting up on the wall itself, so everybody can go through that. And you can write to us, and we'll set up a call with our accessibility expert, one-on-one call with an accessibility expert. With that, we have a few more minutes if we can take a few questions in the interest of time. So shall I pop up the questions?
Yes, Vikalp, you can read out the questions that you think would be good to answer, and just one of us would.
Sure. So the first question is for Krista. So it's addressed to Krista. So what tools and tips and techniques did you use to make sure that that they are onboarded with the initiative, the management is on board with the initiative that you had to take?
At first, I started small and just started with one-on-one conversations with various people in leadership. I did a few things. I mentioned statistics because I feel like data actually is very helpful with decision makers who like to make decisions based on data. And so I didn't just talk about the audience of people that we're not reaching. I did talk about that, but I also talked about the impact of accessibility conscious customers, which are people that know somebody with a disability, and it impacts, they see the struggles and things that they have with accessing technology, and it impacts their buying decisions as well. And the overall, the increased consciousness of an awareness that companies are making, they're making decisions now based on accessibility and what products they're going with, because they realize that it's also a reflection on them in choosing vendors that are accessible and inclusive. So I started with those kinds of things. And then I also took our website and did just some automated checkers and showed all the accessibility errors that existed just on one screen in our this is not just something that we can kick this can down the road and address it later, that these are very real problems. And this is how it is going to impact somebody with a disability trying to use our products.
Thank you for that, Krista. I have another question for Cassandra. As a CEO of an international organization, what would you need to see in order to approve the accessibility investment?
Again, I think I mentioned, a strategy. So I look for the leaders within the organization that lead the various departments to do just that. So we have weekly staff meetings, we have individual one-on-one meetings. So there are conversations that go on to kind of guide, where we are, where we've been, where we are, and where we need to go. And so I ask for, these types of proposals or strategic plans, if you will, from the department heads that would put us in the best place to serve. And so that is one thing that I look at, and where that person, draws the data is based on, the organization. So we're not just looking at what needs to happen here within the States, but we look at what needs to happen from a global perspective as well. So I think that, just in short, to answer that question, is a well put, well thought out strategy that has been inclusive of the conversations that we're having organization wide and with individual departments.
All right. Thank you, Cassandra. I have one more question. Can you recommend a resource for learning designers that references specific accessibility issues we should be thinking about while developing a course? David, if you can answer it, that'll be great. Or
sure, I'll be pleased to do so. I think this is the question from Kelly on the chat. Yeah. So Kelly, it's a great question, and the challenge is that there are many resources, and they vary greatly depending on the e-learning you're developing is synchronous or asynchronous, and what instructional design tools you're using, what platform you're using, and as well the whole LMS, the ecosystem itself. Because if I could go sideways for a moment, one of the biggest challenges we discover is people will put an awful lot of work into getting a module accessible, and that's applaudable. But they'll not notice that the entire arc from being in the lobby to registering to creating your account to taking the courses to getting your certificate, the entire arc of the e-learning is not accessible. And it's like having fully accessible washrooms on a restaurant on the 23rd floor of a building that doesn't have a ramp at the front door. So the resources are there, but we need to be more specific about what your ecosystem is. But whatever you're doing, keep in mind that we want to make that entire e-learning experience accessible so that people can really succeed, so that everyone can succeed with the learning outcomes you're seeking.
Got it. Thank you, David. I guess with this, we are done with the questions for now, and we are running out of time also. So thank you, panelists, for answering the questions. And if at all there is any unanswered question, we'll be emailing the responses. And you're welcome to connect with our panelists directly via LinkedIn. I shared the profiles in the chat window for everybody's reference. In case if you'd like to know more about Harbinger, I'm posting Harbinger's email ID also, and we'll set up a one-on-one demo for everybody. Thank you, panelists. With this, I'll conclude the session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
Great
Vikal,
event.
and the panelists and all the attendees. We appreciate your showing up here, and we salute your commitment to this issue. And hopefully, you go back feeling better about accessibility and your ability to stand up and say, hey, we need to build this because it's the right thing to do and it's the smart thing to do. So thank you, and thanks, Krista. Thank you, Cassandra. Thanks, David. Much appreciated.
Thank you, the entire team Harbinger, for putting it together. What a great series the Power Hours are.
Thank
Agreed.
you. Thank you. We appreciate it.